Every Sunday, my own mother would take me by the hand to the prayer room and close the door, saying, "Be a good servant to the man of God, my daughter." At 9 years old, I already knew that the price of divine blessing was paid with my body and my silence. Hello, my dear friends. What a joy to be able to talk with you today. I'm Elizabeth Thompson, 73 years young, and I live here in the peaceful town of Asheville, North Carolina. I was born in Pine Creek, a tiny place in rural Kentucky, but life brought me to North Carolina many years ago, and here I made my peaceful corner of the world. Today, my days are filled with the greatest blessing God could give me, my grandchildren. I have 4 wonderful grandkids, Laura, who's 8, Peter, who's 6, Claire, who's 4, and little Gabriel, who's just 2 years old. They are the light of my life, the reason for my smile every morning. My daughter Mary lives nearby, just 2 streets away, and every day she drops the children off with me while she goes to work at the hospital where she's a nurse. Early in the morning, the doorbell rings and those smiling little faces invade my house, bringing joy. I prepare breakfast for them, oatmeal with cinnamon for Laura, who's just like her grandma in her preferences, toast with butter and hot chocolate for Peter, and fruit puree for the little ones. Then it's time for stories, games, and lots of affection. With the children, I've rediscovered the world. Through their little eyes, I see magic in the simplest things. An ant carrying a leaf, a butterfly landing on a flower in the garden, a bird building a nest. I taught Laura to make rag dolls, just as my grandmother taught me. Peter loves when I tell stories about my childhood in Kentucky, minus the sad parts, of course. And the little ones just want to be held and sung lullabies, which I sing with all the love in the world. Taking care of them has healed many old wounds. Each tight hug, each "Grandma, I love you," said with that sincerity that only children have, is medicine for the soul. Seeing how they grow up loved, protected, respected in their innocence, this gives me a peace that I can't explain in words. It's as if, through them, I could relive my own childhood, but this time, the right way, the way it should have been. Oh, and if you're watching me now, would you please do me a favor? Click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. This helps this grandma here to reach more people with her stories. And tell me in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or late at night? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, okay? Let's create a chain of affection. You know, my dears, today I want to share with you a story that I kept silent for many years. A story about how true faith can be confused with blindness, and how the people who should protect us are sometimes the ones who hurt us the most. It's difficult to talk about this, even after so much time, but I feel I need to tell it so that other children can be protected, and so that other women find the courage to break the silence. When I was a child, back in Pine Creek, the church was the center of our lives. My mother said that God had special plans for each of us, but I couldn't imagine what kind of plan was reserved for me. I still remember the smell of the candle wax and the fear I felt every Sunday when the bell rang, calling us to worship. It was a time of much confusion and pain, but it was also where I learned that true light sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. I was born in 1952 in a simple house on the outskirts of Pine Creek. Our house was a little away from the center, with a small yard where my mother, Sarah Thompson, planted a bit of everything to help feed the family. My father, John Thompson, worked as a carpenter, making furniture and repairing whatever needed fixing in the houses around the area. He was a quiet man, a man of few words, who left very early and returned when the sun had already set. We had a simple life, but we never lacked for food. We were 4 siblings. I, the youngest of the family, had August, who was the oldest, 8 years older than me. Then came Eliza, who was 6 years older, and Thomas, who was 3 years ahead of me. As the youngest, I was always doted on by my siblings, who called me Little Beth and carried me up and down in their games. Our house was simple, but well kept. It had 2 bedrooms, one where my parents slept and another where the 4 of us siblings squeezed into 2 beds. The kitchen had a wood stove that stayed lit all day, and it was the warmest place in the house. The living room was small, with a straw sofa that my father had made himself and a small table where a family portrait and a large, black-covered Bible sat, which my mother read every day. What I remember most from that time was the smell of wet earth after the rain, when we would go out to play barefoot in the mud. We played hide-and-seek, ring around the rosy, jump rope, and house under the tamarind tree in the backyard. My best friend was Zelda, daughter of Mrs. Gertrude, our neighbor. We spent hours making rag dolls and inventing stories for them. My mother, oh, my mother. Sarah was her name, but I never knew a woman who placed so much value on joy, at least in front of others. At home, she was strict and demanding, especially with matters of faith. She was the first to arrive at church and the last to leave. She knew the Bible by heart and believed that every word in it was to be followed to the letter. From a very young age, I was taught that the church was our second home, and that respect for men of God came right after respect for parents. Our congregation was the Church of Divine Promise, a small white church with a wooden cross at the very top, which gathered about 30 families from the area. Services were held 3 times a week, but Sunday was the most important day, when everyone dressed in their best clothes and spent the entire day there. In Pine Creek, in those days, religion shaped everything. The year's festivities revolved around the religious calendar. We had the May Festival, when houses were decorated with colorful banners and there were processions through the streets. In the summer, it was time for the county fair, with bonfires, square dances, and lots of country music, which was the only music my mother allowed, and even that reluctantly. We ate roasted corn, baked apples, cornbread, and drank homemade cider, which the adults prepared weeks in advance. At school, I was a quiet girl who didn't cause trouble. I liked to study and had a way with words. Teacher Leonora always said I had a future ahead of me, that I could even be a teacher one day. I dreamed of that, imagined myself teaching other children, far from there, perhaps in Louisville, which to me seemed like a magical and distant place. It was around the age of 7 that I began to notice there was something different about me. My mother began to separate me from my siblings on certain occasions. While they could go play after Sunday service, I had to stay for special doctrine lessons. She would comb my hair carefully, put on a white dress that was saved just for these occasions, and tell me, "You are special, Elizabeth. God has chosen you for a mission." I remember once, I must have been about 8 years old, when I asked my mother why only I had to stay for these lessons. She squeezed my arm tightly, her eyes flashing in a way that frightened me, and said, "Never question the Lord's designs. It is an honor to be chosen. You have to be on your knees thanking God for the blessing you received." And that's how I grew up, between playing in the yard with my siblings and Zelda, classes at the local school, and the long Sundays at church, which began with joy and ended with a knot in my stomach that I couldn't explain. My father hardly interfered in my upbringing. When he was at home, he would stay on the porch making small wood carvings or reading the newspaper that came once a week from the capital. The issues of education and religion were my mother's territory, and not even he dared to question. And so it was, until I was 12, when everything began to change. Our little church received a new spiritual guide, coming from a larger city. The old one, Mr. Anthony, was already quite elderly, and could no longer conduct the services with the vigor the congregation expected. The new leader arrived on a Sunday morning, dressed in white, with a smile that showed all his teeth and a voice that sounded like thunder. The entire church fell silent when he began to preach, and I saw my mother cry with emotion for the first time. "He is a messenger of God," she whispered, squeezing my hand, "a true prophet among us." It was on my 13th birthday, in May of 1965, that everything began to change in a way that would mark my life forever. I remember it as if it were yesterday. Mom had made a coconut cake, my favorite, and invited some people from the church for a simple celebration after Sunday service. I was wearing a new dress, light blue, that my sister Eliza had sewn especially for the occasion. After the birthday wishes and the small celebration, when we were already preparing to return home, my mother approached with a different smile on her face. "Our guide wants to speak with you, Elizabeth. It's a special honor on your birthday." I felt a chill run down my spine. The special lessons with the old Mr. Anthony were just conversations about the Bible, where he, already elderly and with poor eyesight, would ask me to read passages aloud and then explain the meanings. But the new guide was different. Since his arrival the year before, he had transformed our small congregation. The services now lasted for hours, with people crying, shouting, and even fainting when he laid hands on them. My mother venerated him in a way I had never seen before. "He has the gift of prophecy," she would say. "He can see the future and the past of people. He can heal diseases and cast out demons." That Sunday in May, I was led by the hand to the back room of the church. It was a small room that served as an office and library for the spiritual guide. It had a dark wooden desk, some chairs, and shelves full of religious books. A large crucifix hung on the wall, and there was a strong smell of incense in the air. "Leave us alone," he said to my mother, with that voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. She nodded, with her eyes lowered in a sign of respect, and before leaving, she turned to me and said, "Be a good servant to the man of God, my daughter. Remember that you were chosen." When the door closed, I stood there, standing, not knowing what to do or say. He sat in the chair behind the desk and watched me for what seemed like an eternity. "Do you know why you're here, Elizabeth?" he finally asked. To learn more about the Bible, sir," I replied hesitantly. He let out a short laugh. "Not just that. You are here because your mother made a promise. She promised that if God healed your father from that pneumonia 7 years ago, she would offer her youngest daughter for the service of the Lord." I was confused. I didn't remember my father having been so sick, but I was very young at the time. "What kind of service, sir?" He got up and walked around the desk, coming very close to me, so close that I could smell the clove of his lotion. "The most sacred service that exists, the one that only the chosen ones can provide." What happened in that room that day, and on the Sundays that followed, I took many years to process. In my little girl's mind, raised to obey and never question religious authorities, that was a kind of ritual, a necessary sacrifice to ensure God's blessings for my family. "The price of blessing," as he called it. "Your silence is your greatest proof of faith," he would always tell me at the end, when I already had teary eyes and a shattered soul. "If you tell anyone, you will be disobeying God and your entire family will be punished." And I believed it. How could I not believe? Since I was born, I had learned that his voice, first that of Mr. Anthony, then that of this man, was the voice of God himself on earth. My mother would wait for me outside, always with a proud look, as if I had fulfilled a sacred mission. She would hug me, run her hand through my hair, and say, "That's right, daughter. This is how we thank God for all the blessings he gives us." At home, things began to change too. My mother began to treat me differently from my siblings. While they had to help with household chores, I was spared. "Elizabeth already does the most important work for this family," she would say when my sister Eliza complained. I got a room all to myself when August left home to work in another city, an unimaginable privilege until then. But these privileges did not compensate for the emptiness that was growing inside me. I began to withdraw from other children my age. I no longer played with Zelda, who didn't understand why I had changed so much. At school, teacher Leonora noticed that I was quieter, less interested in studies. "What's happening, Elizabeth?" she asked me one day after class. You were such a dedicated student, and now it seems like your mind is always elsewhere." I almost told her. I even opened my mouth, but the guide's words echoed in my head. "Your silence is your greatest proof of faith." And I closed my mouth again, shook my head, and just said I was tired. At night, lying in my bed, I would cry softly so no one would hear. I prayed, asking God to explain to me why this was happening, why I had been chosen for that kind of service. Sometimes I dreamed that I was running through an open field, far from the church, far from that room, far from that man. But I always woke up in the same bed, in the same house, with the same fate waiting for me every Sunday. One afternoon, when I was almost 14, I was helping my mother prepare dinner. Gathering my courage, I asked her, "Mom, why do only I have to stay after the service? Why did Eliza never have to go to the special lessons?" She put down the knife she was using to cut the vegetables and looked at me with that stern look I feared so much. "Because you are special, Elizabeth. You were chosen. It's an honor that not everyone deserves. But I don't want to be special, Mom. I don't like—" I couldn't finish the sentence. The slap came quickly and hard, leaving my cheek burning. "Never repeat that again. Do you think I'm happy to hand you over? Do you think it's easy for a mother? But it's necessary. It's the price we pay for the blessings we receive. Your father would be dead if it weren't for this sacrifice. Your siblings would have nothing to eat. Our house would have been taken by the flood last year. Do you want to carry the guilt for all these misfortunes?" I lowered my head, tears silently streaming down. "No, Mom." "Then be thankful for being the chosen one. Many girls would like to be in your place." Those words horrified me even more. Were there other girls going through the same thing in other congregations? Was that really normal, as my mother and the guide made it seem? I began to observe other girls my age at church. Some looked at me with envy when I was called to stay after the service. Others averted their gaze, as if they knew something they couldn't say. I noticed that Mrs. Irene's daughter, Claire, who was a year younger than me, was starting to receive special attention from the guide as well. He would call her to help organize the hymnals, to stay after the service for doctrine lessons. The same empty look I saw in the mirror every morning was beginning to appear in her eyes. One Sunday, when I left the back room, I found Claire waiting her turn. Our eyes met for a moment, and in that moment, without saying a word, we knew we shared the same terrible secret. I wanted to say something, to warn her, to save her, but the words wouldn't come out. The fear was greater than any protective impulse. It was on that same day that something changed inside me. It wasn't a great revelation, nor a moment of sudden courage. It was just a small seed of doubt that began to germinate. What if that wasn't God's will? What if the guide was using the Lord's name in vain? What if my mother was wrong, blinded by a distorted devotion? These questions began to occupy my thoughts, day and night. I began to pay more attention to the sermons, looking for contradictions. I began to read the Bible in secret, not just the passages he selected, but the entire book, trying to understand for myself. And the more I read, the more that seed of doubt grew. But it was still a long way before I would find the courage to openly question or seek help. The fear was still too great. The control that he and my mother had over me was almost absolute. And so I continued, Sunday after Sunday, entering that room, leaving a part of my soul there each time I left. The only thing that kept me going was the idea that one day, when I was older, I could leave that town, that church, that life. I dreamed of Louisville, of studying, of becoming a teacher like Mrs. Leonora had suggested. That dream, as distant as it seemed, was the only light at the end of that endless tunnel of Sundays. The years went by, and that terrible ritual continued to be a part of my life, as if it were something normal. I was already 15 when I realized that our family seemed to be prospering in a way that others couldn't. My father received an offer to open his own small carpentry shop. My brother August returned from his time away with enough money to buy a piece of land. Eliza secured a good marriage with the son of the general store owner, a hard-working and respected young man in the community. You see, Elizabeth? These are the blessings that your sacrifice brings to us, my mother would say, as if that should console me. And in a way, it worked. If at least my suffering brought some good to the people I loved, perhaps it was worth it. That's how I tried to convince myself, to bear the burden. But as time passed, the guide became more demanding, more controlling. The Sundays after service were no longer enough. Now he would send for me on random days, saying he had received divine guidance for special prayer sessions. My mother always complied without questioning, taking me to the church at any time of day or night. "She needs to come now," he would say, and off we would go, even if it was during dinner, even if it was late at night. My father began to find these outings strange, but whenever he questioned, my mother would respond, "These are church matters, John. You wouldn't understand." On one of these nights, as we were walking back home under a starry sky typical of the Kentucky countryside, I gathered my courage and said, "Mom, I can't take it anymore. Please don't make me go back there." She stopped walking and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't anger nor disappointment. It was fear. "You don't understand, daughter. We can't stop now. He said that if the sacrifice is interrupted, all the blessings will turn into curses. Your father will lose the carpentry shop. August will lose his land. Eliza will lose her husband. And something terrible will happen to Thomas." "What kind of God would do that, Mom? What kind of God would punish innocent people?" "Don't blaspheme," she whispered, looking around as if someone might hear us on that deserted road. "It's not God who punishes. It's the demons who are always lurking, waiting for a crack in our faith to attack. The guide is our protection against them." I realized at that moment that my mother was as trapped as I was, only in a different prison. The prison of fear, of superstition, of a faith distorted by years of manipulation. But that didn't make it any easier to bear what I was going through. At school, my grades began to drop drastically. Teacher Leonora, concerned, called my mother in for a conversation. "Elizabeth was one of the best students, but now she can barely concentrate. Has something happened at home?" "She is going through a period of spiritual trial," my mother replied, using the same words the guide used. "It's something necessary for the maturing of the soul." The teacher didn't seem convinced, but in that time and place, questioning the authority of parents or the church wasn't common. Even so, she tried to help me in her own way, offering extra classes, lending books, trying to rekindle my interest in studies. It was through one of these books that I found a bit of escape. It was a novel about a young woman from the countryside who goes to study in the city and becomes a respected professional. I clung to that story like a castaway clings to a piece of wood. I read and reread it in secret, dreaming that one day that could be my story too. Meanwhile, at church, things were getting more and more intense. The guide had built a true empire of devotion. People treated him like a demigod, believing he could predict the future, cure diseases, ward off curses. His influence extended beyond Pine Creek, reaching neighboring communities. With this growing popularity, he became increasingly bold, increasingly sure of his impunity. The number of chosen ones increased. Besides me and Claire, at least 3 other girls were co-opted for the special service. We would sometimes meet in the corners of the church, exchanging glances that said more than words. A silent club of wounded souls, united by a terrible secret that none of us dared to share. One of these girls, Selena, daughter of farmers from a neighboring community, couldn't take the pressure. One day, she simply disappeared. It was said that she had run away to Louisville, but the rumors that ran in hushed voices suggested something much darker. She questioned the authority of the guide, I heard my mother comment with another devotee. God punished her for her disobedience. That chilled me inside. Was that the fate of any of us who dared to rebel? To disappear without a trace? To become an example, a legend to frighten the others? Fear consumed me, But paradoxically, it also began to give way to a dull anger, an indignation that grew with each Sunday, with each session in that back room. I began to fantasize about escapes, about denunciations, about some kind of justice. But who could I talk to? Who would believe the word of a teenager against that of a man revered by the entire community? One night, unable to keep everything inside me any longer, I wrote a letter. I didn't put a name, nor a recipient. It was just an outpouring, a silent scream on paper. I told everything from the beginning, from the first special lessons to the rituals that followed. I wrote about the other girls, about Selena who had disappeared, about how my mother handed over her own daughter, thinking she was serving God. After writing, I didn't know what to do with that letter. I thought about sending it to some authority in Louisville, but I didn't know anyone there. I thought about giving it to teacher Leonora, but I feared the consequences for her and for me. Finally, in an act of desperation and courage, I placed the letter under the door of the Pine Creek Sheriff's Office late at night when no one could see me. For days, I lived in a state of extreme anxiety, waiting for something to happen, for someone to come investigate, for someone to save us. But nothing changed. The days remained the same. The Sundays continued to be days of terror. The special sessions continued to happen in that back room. Later, I discovered that the sheriff was the guide's cousin and a frequent attendee at the church. The letter probably went directly into his hands, and from there, who knows, into the flames of some fire. This failure almost completely broke me. I felt there was no way out, that I was condemned to live that nightmare for the rest of my life. I began to have dark thoughts, to consider desperate alternatives to escape that situation. It was during this time that I met Roy, a young man who had recently moved to Pine Creek. He came from Lexington and had different, more open ideas. He didn't attend our church, which already put him under suspicion in the eyes of the community. I met him for the first time at the fair, where he was helping his uncle sell crafts. "You always seem so sad," he told me one day, when I stopped to look at the carved wooden objects that reminded me of my father's work. "Your eyes don't match your age." That observation, so simple and direct, caught me off guard. No one had ever noticed my sadness, or at least no one had had the courage to mention it. For a moment, I felt like telling him everything, unloading, asking for help. But the fear was still greater. "It's your imagination," I replied, looking away. "If you say so." He shrugged, but continued to observe me with those eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. We met other times, always by chance, always with brief and seemingly unimportant conversations. But each of these encounters was like a small window opening to a different world, a world where I could just be a normal young woman, without the weight of that terrible secret. My mother noticed these subtle changes in my behavior. "You're different, Elizabeth. More rebellious." "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom." The guide also noticed. He said, "You're not receiving the blessings with the same spirit of humility anymore. This is dangerous, daughter. Very dangerous." The mention of the guide having noticed some change in me filled me with dread. It meant he was watching, analyzing, perhaps preparing for some kind of punishment. I remembered Selena, and the fear returned with full force. The following Sunday, he was especially cruel during the special session. "You think you can escape?" he whispered in my ear as I trembled uncontrollably. "You belong to me. Your soul belongs to me. No one will believe you. No one will help you." I left that room more broken than ever. My mother was waiting outside, as always, but this time there was no pride in her eyes, just poorly disguised anxiety. "What happened in there?" "Nothing different from usual, Mom," I replied, unable to face her. He said, "You're being tempted by the devil, that you need to be purified." Those words sent a chill through me. Purified was a term he used for his most extreme rituals, those that involved prolonged fasts, night vigils, and sometimes even physical punishments under the pretext of expelling evil spirits. "No, Mom. Please, I'm fine. I'm not being tempted by anyone. But she didn't seem to hear me. Her eyes had that fanatical gleam that I knew so well. He knows what's best, daughter. He has the gift of vision. If he says you need to be purified, then it's because your soul is in danger. That night, I couldn't sleep. I knew something terrible was being prepared for me, something that could be the end of any hope of escape that I might still have. I thought about running away that very night, just taking to the road and going anywhere far from there. But where to? How would I survive? And what would happen to my family? The answer came the next day, when I returned from school. My mother was waiting with a solemn expression. The guide received a revelation. You will participate in a special purification ritual next Sunday. You will be secluded in the church for 3 days, in fasting and prayer. Panic took over me. 3 days alone with him, without witnesses, without protection, without food to keep me strong. It was a death sentence for my soul, perhaps even for my body. I can't, Mom. I have tests at school on Monday. I've already spoken with Teacher Leonora. She understands the importance of your spiritual journey. I felt a stab of betrayal. Even Teacher Leonora, the only person I minimally trusted, had been co-opted into that madness. Or perhaps she simply had no choice, just like no one seemed to have in that town dominated by fear and superstition. It was at this moment, feeling completely cornered, that I made a desperate decision. I needed to talk to Roy. He was from outside, had different ideas, maybe he could help me somehow. It was a minimal chance, but it was the only one I had. That afternoon, I slipped out of the house, saying I was going to buy thread for my mother at the store. I ran to the fair, praying to find Roy at his uncle's stall, and there he was, arranging small wooden sculptures. I need your help, I said, without preamble, my voice trembling with fear and urgency. He seemed surprised by my direct approach, but nodded. What happened? I didn't tell everything. I didn't have the courage yet. I just said I was in danger, that I needed to leave town before Sunday, that something terrible awaited me if I didn't run away. Roy looked at me for a long moment, as if he were evaluating whether I was telling the truth, or if I was just a teenager being dramatic. Finally, he said, I have a cousin in Jacobina who can shelter you for a while. I can arrange a ride for you with a merchant who's going there tomorrow. A wave of relief flooded me, immediately followed by a new wave of panic. And my family? What will happen to them when they discover I've run away? I don't know, Roy answered honestly. But what will happen to you if you stay? That question echoed in my head as I returned home. What would happen to me if I stayed? Would I end up like Selena, disappeared without a trace? Or worse, would I continue there, year after year, being offered as a sacrifice in the name of a distorted faith? The night was one of insomnia and anguish. In the morning, I packed a small bundle with the little I had of value, some clothes, the book that Teacher Leonora had given me, a small medal that had belonged to my grandmother. I hid everything under the bed, waiting for the right moment to leave. But fate had other plans for me. At noon, while I was helping my mother prepare lunch, we heard loud knocks on the door. It was one of the church deacons, his face contorted with anger. Where is your blasphemous daughter? He shouted as soon as my mother opened the door. What are you talking about, Joshua? My mother asked, confused. She was seen talking with that outsider at the fair yesterday, the one who mocks our faith. The guide already knows everything. He wants to see her immediately. My blood froze in my veins. Someone had seen me with Roy and reported to the guide. My escape plan had been discovered before it could even be put into practice. Is this true, Elizabeth? My mother turned to me, her eyes wide with fear and indignation. There was no point in denying it. Yes, Mom, he's just an acquaintance. I didn't do anything wrong. Just knowing people from outside is already wrong, Deacon Joshua vociferated, especially someone who has a pact with the enemy. Pact with the enemy? He's just a young man who sells crafts at the fair. Silence, my mother shouted, surprising me with her vehemence. "You're going to church right now, and you're going to explain yourself to the guide, and you're going to ask forgiveness on your knees for your behavior." I realized at that moment that I had no choice. If I resisted, it would only make the situation worse. Perhaps, if I showed myself repentant, I could buy some time, postpone the purification ritual, and find another way to escape. "Yes, Mom," I replied, lowering my head in a demonstration of submission. We walked in silence to the church, Deacon Joshua in front, like a guard conducting a prisoner, my mother right behind, murmuring prayers, and me in the middle, feeling as if I were walking to the gallows. The church was empty at that time of day, except for the presence of the guide, who was waiting for us in the back room, that same room that had been the scene of so many horrors over the years. "Leave us alone," he said to the deacon and my mother, with that voice that admitted no contestation. My mother hesitated for the first time. "Perhaps I should stay, to help with spiritual guidance." "It won't be necessary, Sister Sarah. This is between me, the girl, and God." Reluctantly, she left, closing the door behind her. And once again, I found myself alone with him in that cursed room. "So, Elizabeth," he began, his voice dangerously calm, "I heard you've been making forbidden friendships." That confrontation in the back room was the worst of all. The guide didn't restrain himself to just harsh words or veiled threats. His fury manifested physically, leaving marks that I couldn't hide in the days that followed. "This is just the beginning of the purification," he said at the end, adjusting his vestments as if nothing had happened. "On Sunday, you will understand the true meaning of serving God." When I left that room, my mother was waiting outside, the rosary wrapped around her fingers, her lips moving in silent prayer. Seeing my state, her eyes widened for a moment, but soon returned to the resigned expression of always. "It's for your own good," was all she said, as we walked back home. That night, lying in bed, feeling pains that went far beyond the physical, I made a decision. No matter how, no matter the price, I needed to escape before Sunday. The idea of the 3-day purification ritual filled me with a terror that I can't describe even today, so many years later. I tried to talk to Roy again, but I discovered that he and his uncle had left town in a hurry. There was a rumor that the guide had declared them servants of the devil and incited the congregation against them. My last hope of escape had disappeared. The days that followed were a blur of fear and despair. My mother barely let me leave the house, except to go to school, and even then, Deacon Joshua would accompany me on the journey, like a guard. At home, she made me pray for hours, read specific passages from the Bible about obedience and sacrifice, preparing me for what was to come. On Saturday night, the eve of the fateful day, I couldn't sleep. I spent hours looking at the ceiling, imagining ways to escape, even knowing that all doors were closed to me. It was then that I remembered something that teacher Leonora had said in a class. Sometimes, when we can't change a situation from the outside, we need to change it from within. What did that mean for me at that moment? That even if I couldn't physically escape, perhaps I could find a way to resist internally, to not let him completely break my spirit. It was a fragile idea, but it was all I had. Sunday arrived, implacable as always. It was Easter Sunday, a special date in the religious calendar, which meant that the church would be packed, including visitors from neighboring congregations. My mother dressed me in a white dress, a symbol of purity, a cruel irony, considering what awaited me. "Today is a special day," she said as she arranged my hair. "The guide will publicly announce that you have been chosen for a 3-day spiritual retreat. It's an honor, Elizabeth. Many girls would like to be in your place." I looked at her through the mirror, trying to understand how a mother could hand over her own daughter like that. Did she really believe that was a divine calling? Or was she so trapped in her own web of fear and blind devotion that she could no longer distinguish right from wrong? The church was really full that morning. I recognized faces from other communities, entire families who had come to honor the special Easter service. We sat in the first row, as always. My mother to my right, proud and haughty, my father to my left, as oblivious as ever to what was really happening, and my brother Thomas beside him, the only one in the family who sometimes looked at me with an expression that suggested he might suspect something. The service began with the usual hymns, followed by readings and prayers. The guide was particularly inspired that day, his voice thundering through the space, his hands gesturing dramatically as he spoke about sacrifice, redemption, and obedience. Just as Christ gave himself on the cross, we must give ourselves to the service of God, he shouted, walking from one side of the pulpit to the other. Just as Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac, we must be willing to sacrifice what is most precious to us. The congregation responded with fervent amens, some people even getting up, overcome with emotion. The atmosphere was one of collective ecstasy, the kind of environment where reason is lost and fanaticism thrives. It was then that it happened. At the height of his sermon, taken by an almost feverish fervor, the guide pointed directly at me and my mother, seated in the first row. "See this woman," he exclaimed, indicating my mother, "a true servant of God who does not hesitate to hand over her own daughter as an offering on my altar to receive the grace of the Lord." A sudden silence fell over the church. Those words, said that way, sounded strange. It wasn't the kind of thing that was said in public, even in our congregation where fanaticism was the norm. It was too specific, too personal, and the choice of words, "my altar" instead of "God's altar," revealed an arrogance that, for a moment, seemed to shock even the most devout faithful. My mother lowered her head, as if feeling the weight of the gazes that now turned to us. Beside me, I felt my father shift uncomfortably on the bench. And I, for the first time in years, felt a small flame of hope light inside me. That had been a slip, an accidental confession, and someone, perhaps, had noticed. The guide seemed to realize his mistake, for he quickly changed the subject, returning to the theme of resurrection. But the damage was already done. I saw a man in the third row whom I had never seen before, probably a visitor from another congregation, observing me with an expression that mixed curiosity and concern. At the end of the service, as people greeted each other and talked, that man approached me when my mother moved away for a moment to speak with other women. "Hello," he said in a low voice. "My name is Arthur. I'm from the Oak Ridge congregation." I nodded, not knowing what to say. "That thing the pastor said about your mother handing you over as an offering on his altar. What exactly did he mean by that?" I felt my heart race. It was the first time someone had openly questioned that situation. The first time someone seemed to realize that something was wrong there. "I don't know," I replied, my voice almost inaudible, fear still controlling my words. "Are you okay?" he insisted, noticing my unease. "You seem scared." At that moment, I saw my mother coming back in our direction, her face contracted as she realized I was talking to a stranger. I saw the guide watching from afar, his eyes half closed. I saw my whole life up to that point, the years of silence and suffering, and suddenly, like a dam that breaks after years containing the pressure of water, the words began to come out. "I'm not okay," I whispered hastily. He does things, in the back room, after the services. My mother knows. She takes me there. She says it's a necessary sacrifice. He calls it the price of blessing. Today, they're going to take me for a 3-day purification ritual. I'm afraid of what will happen." Arthur's eyes widened. He looked quickly at the guide, then at my mother who was approaching, and then back at me. "Don't worry," he said, his voice firm despite the evident shock on his face. "I'm going to get help." Before he could say anything else, my mother arrived at our side. "Elizabeth, the guide wants to talk to you. It's time to prepare for the retreat." Arthur quickly intervened. "Ma'am, I just invited your daughter to our Easter celebration in Oak Ridge next week. We have many young people her age. It would be a good opportunity for her to meet other members of our congregation." My mother looked at him with suspicion. "I appreciate the invitation, but Elizabeth has spiritual commitments here. Maybe another time." "Of course I understand," Arthur replied, with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It was a pleasure to meet you. God bless you." As we walked away, I looked back one last time. Arthur was talking with other men from his congregation, gesturing discreetly but urgently. Something in his gaze gave me a glimpse of hope, but it was so fragile that I hardly dared to cling to it. My mother took me to the sacristy, where the guide was already preparing the elements for the ritual. "Leave us alone for a moment, Sister Sarah," he said. "I need to explain to Elizabeth what will happen in the next 3 days." As soon as my mother left, he approached, his eyes shining with a mixture of anger and something even more disturbing. "I saw you talking with that man. What did you tell him?" "Nothing, sir," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "He just invited me to an event at his congregation." He studied me for a long moment, as if trying to read my mind. "It doesn't matter. In a few hours, he and all the other visitors will be gone, and you'll be here, alone with me, for 3 days. I have big plans for your purification, Elizabeth. When we're done, you'll be so broken that you'll never think of disobeying or questioning again." The terror I felt at that moment was indescribable. There was no longer any doubt about what awaited me. This had nothing to do with faith, with God, with spiritual purification. It was about power, control, perversion, and I was completely at his mercy. The following hours passed in a blur. There was a fellowship lunch in the churchyard, with families gathered, abundant food, lively conversations. I was there physically, but my mind was distant, desperately searching for an exit that didn't exist. Around 3 in the afternoon, when the sun was beginning to lose strength, the guide made an announcement. "Brothers and sisters, I want to share with you a special blessing that the Lord has granted us. The young Elizabeth, daughter of our dedicated sister Sarah, has been chosen for a 3-day spiritual retreat. She will remain here at the church in fasting and prayer, receiving special teachings to strengthen her faith and prepare for a mission that God has for her." There were murmurs of approval, looks of admiration directed at my mother. Some women even came to hug her, congratulating her for the honor granted to her daughter. "The retreat will begin at sunset," continued the guide. "I ask everyone to leave by then, so that we can prepare the appropriate spiritual environment." People began to disperse, returning to their homes or preparing for the journey back to neighboring communities. I saw the visitors from Oak Ridge gathering near the road, including Arthur, who was looking in my direction with an expression I couldn't decipher. My mother took me home to get some clothes and personal items for the 3 days. "You don't need to bring much," she said. "Just the essentials. Don't forget your Bible." While I was packing a small bundle, like a condemned person preparing for execution, I heard raised voices coming from the living room. My father rarely raised his voice, so I was surprised to recognize his harsh tone. "It doesn't make sense, Sarah. 3 days alone with that man. What is this so-called spiritual retreat? Why only Elizabeth? Why not other girls from the church? You don't understand, John. It's an honor, a blessing. Elizabeth was chosen because she has a special gift." "What gift?" "She's just a girl. And that thing he said today during the sermon, about you handing over our daughter as an offering on his altar. It didn't sound good, Sarah. It didn't sound good at all. You're distorting his words. He meant God's altar, of course." "That's not what he said, and you know it. There's something wrong happening in that church, and I won't allow my daughter to stay there alone for 3 days. I had never heard my father speak like this, always so quiet, so absent. Suddenly, he was questioning, doubting, protecting. I felt a wave of gratitude and relief flood me. Perhaps there was still hope. But my mother didn't yield. "If you prevent Elizabeth from fulfilling her destiny, you'll be bringing disgrace to this family. Everything we've achieved in these years, your carpentry shop, August's land, Eliza's marriage, all of this is due to her sacrifice." "What are you talking about, woman? What sacrifice?" "The promise, John. The promise I made when you were dying of pneumonia. I offered our youngest daughter in exchange for your life, And God answered. He healed you, and in exchange, Elizabeth serves the Lord in the way He determines. There was a heavy silence after this revelation. When my father spoke again, his voice was low, controlled, but full of a contained anger that I had never heard before. Are you telling me that for years you've been allowing our daughter to be what exactly, Sarah? What happens in these special lessons? What happens after the services when you take her to the back room and leave her alone with that man? My mother didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was choked. I don't know the details. I don't want to know. I just know it's necessary, that it's the price of blessing. My God, woman, what have you done? What have you allowed to be done to our daughter? The discussion was interrupted by loud knocks on the door. I heard my mother answer, and then the unmistakable voice of Deacon Joshua filled the living room. The guide sent for the girl. It's almost sunset. The ritual needs to start on time. She's not going anywhere. My father's voice sounded firm, surprising everyone. What do you mean, Brother John? The spiritual retreat has already been announced to the whole congregation. I don't care. My daughter is not going to be alone with that man for 3 days. There was a moment of tense silence, and then Joshua's voice, now low and threatening. Are you questioning the authority of our spiritual guide? This is a rebellion against God. I'm not questioning God. I'm questioning a man who uses God's name for his own purposes. I heard heavy footsteps, and then my father appeared at the bedroom door. His face was pale but determined. Elizabeth, take only the essentials. We're leaving here now. Where to? I asked, hardly believing what was happening. Far away, to my brother's house in Oak Ridge. He's always offered work in his carpentry shop. I should have accepted a long time ago. My mother appeared behind him, her face contorted between fear and anger. You can't do this, John. You'll condemn our entire family. The only condemnation would be to continue allowing what's happening, he replied, without looking at her. Let's go, Elizabeth. Quick. As I gathered my few things, I heard Deacon Joshua leave hastily, probably to warn the guide of what was happening. I knew we didn't have much time. My father tried to convince Thomas to come with us, but my brother, confused by everything that was happening, looked from my father to my mother without knowing what to do. I'll stay with Mom, he said finally. Someone needs to take care of her. There was no time for prolonged goodbyes. My father picked up a small bag with his carpentry tools and some belongings, and we left through the back of the house, avoiding the main street where we could be seen. We walked quickly toward the road that led out of town. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple, when we heard voices and footsteps approaching. My father pulled me behind a bush, and we stayed there, crouched, barely breathing, while a group of men from the church passed by, led by Deacon Joshua. They must be heading for the main road, one of them was saying. We need to intercept them before they leave town. When the voices moved away, my father whispered, We're going to have to cut through the woods, follow the creek to the fork. It will take longer, but it's safer. We began to walk over the rough terrain, moving further and further away from the town. Night fell completely, and we only had the weak light of the moon to guide us. My feet hurt, my heart beat erratically, but each step took me farther from that back room, from that life of fear and submission. After walking for what seemed like hours, we reached a small clearing where my father suggested we rest a bit. I think we've lost them, he said, although his voice didn't sound very confident. It was then that we heard the sound of engines approaching. Lights cut through the darkness, and male voices began to call out, John, Elizabeth, we know you're there. Come back to town now, and the guide will be merciful. My father squeezed my hand. Don't move. Don't make any sound. We stayed there, motionless, while the lights of the lantern swept the vegetation around us. It was so dark that we couldn't see the faces of the men, only silhouettes moving among the trees, a few meters away. They must have headed to Oak Ridge by the main road, someone said. Let's split up, half follow the road, half continue the search here. We heard the sound of some vehicles moving away, but several lanterns continued to scan the area. They were getting closer and closer to our hiding place. It was at this moment that we heard another engine sound, different from the previous ones, and stronger lights illuminated the nearby road. New voices, unknown, sounded in the night. Oak Ridge Sheriff's Department. Who's there? A murmur of confusion spread among the men from the church. Sheriff, what are they doing here? We received a serious complaint about what's happening at the Church of Divine Promise. We're looking for the leader and some witnesses. I recognized Arthur's voice, the man who had spoken to me after the service. It's them, Sheriff, the men from the church. They must be looking for the girl and her father. There was a moment of confusion, with shouts and orders being given. The lanterns began to move erratically, some moving away rapidly, others approaching the road. My father pulled me by the hand. It's our chance. Let's go. We ran toward the lights of the police cars. When they saw us emerge from the vegetation, some officers pointed their weapons, but Arthur quickly shouted, "It's them! The girl and her father! The ones we're trying to help!" A tall man, wearing an official uniform, approached us. "I'm Sheriff Gervais from Oak Ridge. You're safe now." It was only then, hearing those words, that I realized the nightmare had really ended. My legs weakened, and I would have fallen if my father hadn't held me firmly. "What happens now?" my father asked, his voice trembling with fatigue and relief. "Now," said the sheriff, "we're going back to Pine Creek and arresting a false prophet." The return to Pine Creek was very different from our desperate flight. Now, we were protected by police cars, with Sheriff Gervais in the lead and Arthur at our side, explaining how everything had happened. "When I heard what the guide said during the sermon, I found it strange," Arthur told us, as we traveled down the dark road. "But it was your reaction, girl, that alerted me. Then, when we talked, and you told me about the special sessions and the purification ritual, I realized something very serious was happening." Arthur explained that, upon returning to Oak Ridge with his congregation, he went straight to talk to Sheriff Gervais, who was his brother-in-law. I told him my suspicions, and he decided to investigate immediately. "We had already heard rumors about this church," the sheriff added, "but we never had evidence or witnesses willing to speak. When Arthur told me what you had said and what he had heard during the sermon, I knew it was time to act." My father, sitting beside me in the back seat of the police car, held my hand tightly. "Why didn't you tell me before, daughter?" he asked, his voice filled with emotion. "All these years." "I was afraid, Dad," I replied, finally letting the tears flow freely. "Afraid of what could happen to the family. He said that if I told, everyone would be punished, and Mom always said it was necessary, that it was the price of blessing." He shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I will never forgive myself for not noticing sooner, for being so absent, so blind." When we arrived in Pine Creek, it was almost midnight. The town was silent, except for the area around the church, where several people gathered, attracted by the unusual movement of police cars. Sheriff Gervais asked us to stay in the car while he and his men entered the church. From outside, we could hear raised voices, protests, and then the unmistakable sound of handcuffs being closed. Minutes later, we saw the guide being brought out, handcuffed, escorted by 2 officers. His face, usually so serene and controlled, was now contorted with rage. When he saw us in the car, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me involuntarily shrink back. "You'll regret this, Elizabeth," he shouted as he was pushed into a police van. "God will punish your disobedience." But his threats no longer had the same power over me. There, protected by the presence of my father and the authorities, I was finally able to see that man for what he really was. Not a messenger of God, but a predator who used faith to manipulate and abuse. The night was long. We were taken to the Pine Creek Sheriff's Office, where we gave detailed statements. It was the first time I told everything, from the beginning, without fear of reprisals. Sheriff Gervais and a female officer listened to me with attention and respect, without judgments. "You're very brave, Elizabeth," said the officer, whose name was Nancy, at the end of my account. "Your testimony will help protect other girls." It was then that I learned I wasn't the only one who had spoken. Claire, Mrs. Irene's daughter, had also been brought to the sheriff's office and was telling her story. And to my surprise, 2 other young women, who no longer lived in Pine Creek, had been located and agreed to testify. "We're also looking for Selena," informed the sheriff. "The girl who disappeared. We have reason to believe she may be alive, hidden somewhere." The news gave me a hope I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe Selena was well. Maybe she too could be rescued, just like me. When day broke, the news had already spread throughout Pine Creek and the surrounding areas. The arrest of the guide, the accusations against him, everything was on everyone's lips. The community's reaction was mixed. Some, especially the most fanatical followers, refused to believe the accusations, calling everything religious persecution. Others, mainly parents of young girls, began to ask questions they should have asked a long time ago. My mother was one of those who refused to believe. When we finally saw her, the next morning, her eyes were red from crying, but there was no compassion in her gaze, only anger and incomprehension. "What have you done?" she screamed upon seeing my father and me returning home, escorted by an officer. "You've destroyed everything. The church, our family, our reputation, and for what? Because of lies." "They're not lies, Mom," I replied, finding in myself a strength I didn't know I had. "You know they're not. You took me to him. You closed the door and walked away. You knew what was happening in there." She recoiled as if she had been slapped. "It was necessary," she whispered, but her voice no longer had the same conviction. "It was the price of blessing, I know. You repeated that for years. But what kind of blessing is built on the suffering of a child, Mom? What kind of God would require that?" She didn't answer, just walked away, entering the house and closing the bedroom door. She would stay there for days, refusing to come out, refusing to talk to us, refusing to accept the reality of what she had allowed to happen. The days that followed were a whirlwind. There were testimonies, investigations, medical examinations. We discovered that the guide's real name was Ezekiel Matthews, and that he had a history of similar accusations in other towns, from which he always left before the authorities could act. Pine Creek had been just the most recent in a long list of communities he had exploited. The police found in his house detailed diaries where he recorded his conquests, his manipulation techniques, his plans for future victims. Among them, there were notes about my sister Eliza, from years ago, and more recently, about other girls in the congregation. The horror of those discoveries shocked even the most skeptical. And then, about a week after his arrest, came the news I had been waiting for the most. Selena had been found. She was alive, living with an aunt in a small town near Louisville. She had managed to escape after a purification ritual, similar to what was being prepared for me, and since then had been living in hiding, afraid of being found and brought back. With all this evidence and testimony, there was no doubt that Ezekiel would be convicted. But for me, the true liberation didn't come just from his arrest, but from breaking the silence, from the end of fear, from the possibility of finally beginning to heal wounds that had been open for so many years. My father, fulfilling what he had said on the night of the escape, decided we couldn't stay in Pine Creek any longer. There were too many painful memories there, too many accusing looks, too many whispers behind our backs. He sold the carpentry shop and the house and used the money to start over in Oak Ridge at his brother's house, as had been the original plan. My mother, after weeks of isolation and denial, finally agreed to come with us, although she was no longer the same person. The blind faith that had guided her whole life had been destroyed, and she seemed lost, like a boat without a rudder. It would take years until we could rebuild some kind of relationship, and even then, it would never be like before. Thomas came with us to Oak Ridge, but August and Eliza, already established with their own families, preferred to stay. "We understand your decision," said Eliza when we said goodbye, "but we can't abandon everything we've built here." She hugged me for a long time, whispering in my ear, "Forgive me for not noticing, for not protecting you as an older sister." "There was no way for you to know," I replied, returning the hug. "He deceived everyone." In Oak Ridge, I began a new life. My Uncle Ernest, my father's brother, was a kind and understanding man who welcomed us with open arms into his home. He had a daughter, my cousin Ivy, who was about my age, and we quickly became friends. The most important thing, however, was that I was able to resume my studies. The school in Oak Ridge was larger and better structured than the one in Pine Creek, and the teachers encouraged me to make up for lost time. I studied hard, determined to transform my dream of being a teacher into reality. And so, little by little, day by day, I began to rebuild my life from the rubble. It wasn't easy. There were nightmares, there were days when the weight of memories seemed unbearable. But there were also moments of joy, of discovery, of hope. One of the most important things in this healing process was the help of Dr. Helen, a psychologist from Louisville who came to Oak Ridge once a week. It was through conversations with her that I began to understand that what had happened to me wasn't my fault, that I hadn't allowed the abuse, that I had been a victim of a perverse system of manipulation and control. "You survived, Elizabeth," she told me in one of our sessions. And not only survived, but had the courage to speak, to denounce, to break the cycle. "Do you know how many lives you saved by doing that?" I hadn't thought of it that way, but it was true. After Ezekiel's arrest, other victims in other towns began to speak. A true scheme of institutionalized abuse came to light, involving not only him, but other religious leaders who used the same tactic. It was as if a dam had broken, and all those stories that had been silenced for years could finally be heard. When I turned 18 in 1970, I received a letter from Arthur, the man who had been instrumental in my rescue. He told me that Ezekiel had been sentenced to many years in prison, and that the Church of Divine Promise had been closed. In its place, a new congregation had emerged, led by people committed to a genuine faith based on love and respect, not on fear and manipulation. "Your testimony changed many lives, Elizabeth," he wrote, including mine. After everything that happened, I decided to study theology, to better understand how religion can be used for both good and evil. Today, I am a pastor of a small church in Oak Ridge, where we try to practice a faith that liberates, not imprisons. The letter moved me deeply. It was a reminder that, even from the most painful experiences, positive transformations can emerge. And it was this thought that guided me in the years that followed, as I continued my journey of healing and discovery. Today, at 73, I look back and see that life has given me much more than I could ever have expected in those dark days in Pine Creek. The path wasn't easy. It had many curves and obstacles, but each step brought me here, to this cozy house in Asheville, where I live surrounded by the love of my family and, especially, my grandchildren. After finishing my studies in Oak Ridge, I was able to realize my dream of becoming a teacher. I did the normal course in Louisville, traveling every day in an old bus that bumped along dirt roads. It was a period of much effort, but also of much satisfaction. Each book I read, each knowledge I acquired, was like a brick in the construction of my new life. In 1974, with my diploma in hand, I began teaching at the municipal school in Oak Ridge. It was a simple little school, with small rooms and few resources, but to me, it was a palace. Each child who entered my classroom was an opportunity to make a difference, to protect, to teach not just letters and numbers, but values of respect and dignity. It was at school that I met Anthony, who worked as a secretary for the Regional Board of Education. He would come from time to time to do inspections and always stop to talk with me about teaching methods, about books, about the future of education. He was a gentle, respectful man who listened to me with genuine interest, something rare for the time. Our courtship was slow, cautious, especially on my part. The wounds of the past were still open, and the idea of trusting a man again was frightening. But Anthony was patient. He never pressured me, never demanded more than I was ready to give. He was just there, constant, reliable, showing with actions, not just words, that it was possible for another kind of man to exist in the world. We married in 1976 in a simple ceremony, just with family and close friends. My father, who had regained my trust with his sincere repentance and his effort to protect me, walked me down the aisle. My mother was also there, although she was still a shadow of the woman she had been. After the scandal at the church, she never attended any congregation again, but gradually found a more personal and healthy way to connect with her spirituality. Anthony received an offer to work in the education department of Asheville, North Carolina, shortly after our wedding. It was a difficult decision, leaving family, the comfort of the known, to start over in such a distant place. But perhaps it was exactly what we needed, a new place, without painful memories, without looks that knew our history. And so, in 1977, we moved to Asheville. The city, with its stone streets, its colonial houses, its rich history, enchanted me immediately. There was a serene beauty there, a rhythm of life different from what I knew in rural Kentucky. And there were opportunities, for Anthony in the education department, for me as a teacher in one of the local schools. Our daughter Mary was born in 1979, filling our house with joy and our hearts with a love I didn't know was possible. I held that little baby in my arms for the first time and silently promised that she would never know the kind of pain I had known, that she would be protected, loved, respected in her integrity. And so it was. We raised Mary with much love, with open dialogue, with respect for her opinions and choices. She grew up a strong, determined girl, curious about the world. From an early age, she showed interest in the health area, always asking how things worked, always wanting to help those who were suffering. It was no surprise when she decided to study nursing. She graduated with honors from the university in Charlotte, and soon after got a position at the Asheville Hospital. It was there that she met Edward, a young doctor who had just arrived in the city for his first job after residency. Their wedding, in 2003, was one of the happiest days of my life. Seeing my daughter, radiant in her white dress, beside a man who looked at her with so much love and respect, gave me a feeling that the cycle had closed, that the pain of the past had been transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. And then came the grandchildren. First Laura, so much like her mother in determination, but with her father's eyes. Then Peter, curious and full of energy. Next, sweet Claire, who from an early age showed a special talent for drawing. And finally, little Gabriel, with his golden curls and his smile that lights up any environment. Anthony retired a few years ago, and so did I, after more than 3 decades of teaching. But retirement brought a new purpose, taking care of the grandchildren while Mary and Edward work. Every day, I receive those children in my house and feel that I am doing the most important thing in the world. With them, I relive the childhood that was stolen from me. When we make rag dolls together, when we tell stories under the maple tree in the backyard, when we bake cinnamon cookies in the kitchen, I am giving them what I didn't have. But I am also healing that wounded girl who still lives inside me. Each tight hug, each "Grandma, I love you," said with that sincerity that only children have, is medicine for the soul. Seeing how they grow up loved, protected, respected in their innocence, this gives me a peace that I can't explain in words. My relationship with faith has also transformed over the years. After what I lived through, it would be understandable if I had completely rejected any form of spirituality. But little by little, I found my own path. Not through churches or leaders, but in the direct connection with something greater than us. In the small wonders of everyday life, in the sunrise seen from my porch, in a grandchild's smile, in my husband's love. Anthony was fundamental in this journey. He never tried to impose his beliefs on me. He had been raised in a moderate Methodist family, but was always willing to talk, to explore, to seek with me a deeper meaning for our lives. Together, we built a spirituality based on love, respect, gratitude, not on fear or blind submission. Not everything was perfect, of course. There were difficult moments, challenges that tested our strength. When I lost my father to cancer in 1992, I felt as if an important pillar of my life had collapsed. He had been so fundamental in my rescue, in my reconstruction. His absence left a void that was never completely filled. My mother lived until 2010, spending her last years with us in Asheville. Our relationship never went back to what it was before everything happened. It was impossible, but we found a way to coexist, to share moments, to appreciate the time we had left together. In the end, I think she also found some peace, some redemption. I kept in touch with some people from Pine Creek over the years. Claire, who had also been a victim of the false prophet, married and moved to Louisville, where she raised her family. We wrote to each other for many years, sharing our healing journeys, our achievements, our difficulties. It was an important support, having someone who really understood what I had been through. I also learned, through occasional letters, that Selena had recovered well. After being found near Louisville, she was taken in by an aunt who helped her resume her studies. She became a lawyer and ironically specialized in cases of abuse and exploitation, a way to transform her pain into purpose, just as I did with teaching. Arthur and I also kept in touch. His church in Oak Ridge grew, not in numbers, but in significance for the community. He became known for his work with vulnerable youth, creating education and support programs that helped transform many lives. I learned from you that true faith liberates, does not imprison, he once wrote to me. And so, little by little, with ups and downs, with scars that sometimes still hurt, but also with many joys and achievements, I came to this moment in my life. Sitting on the porch of my house in Asheville, watching my grandchildren play in the garden, feeling the warmth of Anthony's hand on mine, I can say that life, despite everything, has been generous to me. Each wrinkle on my face tells a story of pain, yes, but also of overcoming, of love, of growth. Each white strand in my hair is a reminder that I survived, that I didn't allow those events to define who I am, that I managed to transform pain into purpose, fear into courage, silence into voice. And when I look at my grandchildren, at Laura explaining something to her brother with the patience of a born teacher, at Peter building imaginary castles with twigs and stones, at Claire drawing colorful flowers with her crayons, at Gabriel chasing a butterfly with laughter of pure joy, I know it was worth it. That every tear, every nightmare, every moment of doubt brought me here. And here, in this moment, there is peace, there is gratitude, there is love. My dear friends who have accompanied me this far, sharing this story wasn't easy. Even today, after so many years, some memories bring pain. But I've learned that sometimes we need to revisit the past, not to remain trapped in it, but to understand how we arrived where we are, to recognize our own strength, to give meaning to our journey. If you're going through any situation of abuse, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, I want you to know, you are not alone. You don't deserve this. And most importantly, there is a way out. There is hope. There is life, a full and dignified life, after trauma. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our capacity to start anew each day. At 16, I thought my life was over, that I would never again be able to trust, to love, to feel joy. But here I am, 73 years well lived, surrounded by love, with scars, yes, but also with many victories to celebrate. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. When I look in the mirror, I don't just see an elderly lady. I see a warrior who faced her demons and won, who transformed her pain into purpose, who found light even in the darkest moments. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. In moments when I thought there was no way out, when fear and shame paralyzed me, there was always a small flame of hope that refused to die. It was this flame that sustained me, that gave me strength to take the first step toward freedom. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. They could control my body for a time. They could manipulate my mind. They could isolate me from others. But there was something inside me, an essence, a deep identity, that remained untouched, that resisted, that survived. I discovered we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. How many times did I think I wouldn't survive one more Sunday, one more special session? But I survived. And not only survived, I found strength to denounce, to start over, to build a new life. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. Some marks remain, in occasional nightmares, in moments of sudden insecurity, in triggers that arise when we least expect. But we learn to live with these scars, to recognize them as part of our story, not as definers of our future. My story isn't about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have sunk into bitterness, resentment, hatred, and I would have every right to feel these emotions. They're natural, they're part of the process. But I chose not to be trapped in them. I chose to transform my pain into purpose, my experience into wisdom to help others. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time. And how I fell. There were days when the weight of memories seemed impossible to carry, when questioning why me consumed my energy. But in each fall, I found strength to rise again, to take one more step, no matter how small, toward healing. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows we can flourish even after the storm. As a teacher, I saw many children with looks similar to what I had at that age. Looks that hid painful secrets. And it was for them, as much as for myself, that I decided to break the silence, to use my voice, to be the adult I needed when I was a child. If you're in a situation of abuse, I want you to know there are people willing to help. In every country, there are organizations and authorities prepared to offer support. Don't be afraid to seek help, to tell your story, to take the first step toward freedom. You deserve to be protected, to be heard, to be respected in your dignity. If you know someone who is going through this, be the Arthur of that person, the one who noticed, who asked, who cared enough to do something. Sometimes all someone needs is an extended hand, an attentive ear, someone who says, "I believe you." And if you've been through something similar and are in the process of healing, know that you're not alone on this journey. Each person has their own rhythm, their own path. Don't pressure yourself for not getting over it fast enough. Healing isn't linear. It has ups and downs, advances and retreats. Be patient and gentle with yourself. To parents and caregivers, stay alert. Observe changes in your children's behavior. Create an environment where they feel safe to speak, to express discomfort, to say no. Teach about boundaries, about respect for one's own body, about trust versus blind obedience. And above all, listen, really listen, when they try to tell you something. My dear friends, before I finish, I have a special request for you. If this story touched your heart, if you found any value, any message of hope in my words, please help me reach more people who might need to hear this. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications to receive new videos, and most important, share this video right now with anyone you think might benefit from it. Each share can be the ray of hope someone needed, the extended hand at the exact moment, the word that makes all the difference. It can be the difference between continued silence and the courage to speak, between isolation and seeking help. Don't underestimate the power of a simple share. It can literally save a life. And leave in the comments the word freedom if you watch this far. That word that means so much to me, that represented my greatest dream during those dark years, and that today is a reality I celebrate with each new dawn. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Dignity and respect are everyone's rights, regardless of age, gender, culture, or circumstance. No one, absolutely no one, has the right to use religion, love, authority, or anything else as an excuse to abuse another human being. This is a universal truth that transcends borders and times. I end with a heart full of gratitude for you having listened to me, for having made space in your life for my story. May it serve not as a tale of horror, but as a testimony of hope. That it is possible to survive, that it is possible to rebuild, that it is possible to transform the worst experiences into something meaningful. As an old saying from my homeland goes, after the strongest storm, the sky is bluer. May we all find our blue sky, our peace, our freedom. Until next time, my dear friends, God bless and protect each one of you.